Okay, so thanks for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. It's a great opportunity to speak to such a wonderful audience. So my talk today, virtual reality and audio creativity, telling stories with sound and digital technology. Yes, I'm a reader, old sort of UK sort of title in audio and music technology in our Department of Electronics at the University of York. I also have the great honour of being the University Research Team Champion for Creativity. I'm very interested in what we do with sound creatively and how that's going to be part of the creative process. So let's hope the clicker is doing its thing. So not quite yet. It's on somebody else's laptop. Now let's try. Excellent. So my story today starts with a building in the greatest city in the world, York. This is York Theatre Royal. And York Theatre Royal is an important building for our city. It's a building that has its fundamental roots in the history of our city. It's over 300 years old. A theatre been on site since 1744. It's built on a medieval hospital and it has Roman well underneath the stage. I'm fundamentally interested in building, as are my colleagues in the audio lab. We're interested in the sound that takes place in those buildings and how the buildings shape the sound and performances that we hear within them. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you today. That's my starting point in terms of what we do with sound. And of course, sound is fundamental to the theatrical process. A little bit slower. Yeah, sure. So sound is fundamental to the theatrical process. Speech, singing, how our audiences respond to that in terms of their laughter, their tears, their shouts, their boos perhaps. So what can sound tell us about a place? So I'm going to give you an example from a project that we worked on a few years ago, and it nicely illustrates the kind of work that we do in our department. So this is a place called, it was a project called Resounding Falkland, and we worked with two artists who had been commissioned by the Falkland Estate. And the Falkland Estate is a large area of Royal Parkland in Fife in Scotland, and they'd been asked to reinterpret that landscape in different ways, and predominantly using sound. And so this involved looking at the buildings, looking at the natural landscape, looking at the built landscape, and in this particular example that I'm going to play you, looking at this place called the Temple of Decision. Now, the Temple of Decision is, as you see here, it's a ruin on a hillside overlooking the beautiful landscape of Falkland. And what the artists, David Chapman and Louise K. Wilson, were interested in is how this space had been used over its lifetime. And we did our very best to try and work out the history and the provenance of this building so that ultimately we could try and reconstruct it virtually. And rather than doing a graphical reconstruction of it, which you will see in the film, which doesn't look very exciting, we were more interested in how this building sounded when it still existed. So we could think about the voices and the sounds that would have taken place within that building. It was actually a much more difficult process than we thought because those plans, those documents of that building didn't exist. So we had to look for its reporting in other documents and other sources, and we had to go to testimony of the people who remembered the building. And so what you're going to hear now and see is a short 2-minute segment of a longer film where these artists reflect on the process that they've been through in their history and their understanding of this particular place. And about halfway through this little 2-minute segment, you'll hear David and Louise talking from within the reconstructed Temple of Decision.
On the field below the temple, I found a sheep's skull, picked clean by the crows. As animals decay, the soft exterior rots to reveal the hard structure below. For a building, the soft interiors go first, removed as the inhabitants leave, or left to damp and decay, consumed by mould and animals. But both hard structures will gradually fall, weathered down to dust. If I was in this room, this temple, what would I be doing here? Would I be alone? Would there be people here with me sat around the table, drinking tea or something stronger maybe? Would it be summer with sunlight burning through the red glass on the roof? Would it be winter with a fire laid in the hearth? My back warmed by the hot coals, I stare down at the smoke from the farms and cottages below, edging slowly across the valley.
Was it a place of quiet contemplation, or of social gathering, or of shelter? We heard that it had been used as a hideaway for deserters in the First World War, their presence betrayed by a plume of smoke from the chimney. In the absence of clear echoes, how can we know this place?
So that's an appropriate quote to end on that you heard Louise saying there. In the absence of clear echoes, how can we know this place? Echoes fundamentally make up these spaces in which we inhabit, in which we perform. And they enable us to tell us something about this particular environment that we're working in. And sound is a tricky thing. It's a temporary thing, it's an ephemeral thing, and what we're trying to do is to quantify these objects and these sound objects so that we can understand them better. And this is a process that's called auralization. You can think of it as the sonic equivalent to visualization, and this is fundamentally what we do. So let's talk a little bit about auralization and how we do it and why we're doing it. So fundamentally, we live in an acoustically environmental context every day, and we interact with our acoustic environment whether we know it or not. So one of the places that you will fundamentally understand is your bathroom. Now the bathroom is a hard tiled space. It's also quite a small space, but the acoustic of that environment makes us want to sing in the shower. And the reason we do that is because that acoustic environment makes us sound better, makes us convinces ourselves that we're better than we are at singing, perhaps. And it's an old trick. It's used by studio engineers a lot of time. You put your performer in a studio, you give them a little bit of reverb in their headphones, and they sound that little bit better, and you'll get a better performance from them. Here's another building from our wonderful city of York, York Minster, one of the largest cathedrals in Northern Europe. It's visually impressive, it's architecturally impressive, but it's also acoustically impressive as well. You walk into that building and you get a sense of the sound around you because the echoes in it are so long and so dense. And of course, the acoustics of buildings like this have fundamentally informed the music and the performances that go on in there over many hundreds of years in Western culture. And so it's it's the completely other end of the scale from a bathroom. Very good for singing, very good for organ music, very bad for speech. Very difficult to hear yourself being spoken or to speak to friends in there if they're not very close to you, because it gets very difficult in terms of the intelligibility of your speech. And if we go to the other end of the scale completely, from York Minster, we go to what's called our Anechoic Chamber at the university. And this is where we do a lot of our studies because it's an absolutely controlled environment where there are no echoes. So it's a very, very unusual space to work in. We put performers in there and they hate it because they like to hear this feedback coming from the space because it tells them how they're performing. Put them in there and they don't get anything. It's very, very dry, it's a very naked space to perform in. But for us as scientists and engineers, it's brilliant because we can control everything. So, how do we go about quantifying and capturing these environments? Well, we do it using microphones, and you can always spot an acoustician because when they walk into a nice and interesting building, they'll go like this. And just cock their head to one side and listen to the sound of the building coming back to them. And that's called the impulse response of the building in sort of scientific terms. And so we can do something a bit more than hand claps, or if you watch the little trailer video that we all did, I used a balloon, but we can do a bit better than that. So if we use microphones and loudspeakers, we can do something that's repeatable, and we can do something that's much better quality, and it gives us an acoustic fingerprint of that building so that we can start to analyze it, we can start to understand it, and we can start to, most interestingly in terms of my talk today, use it creatively. And so we take microphones and we take loudspeakers into buildings wherever we can get into them. So we've done places like York Minster. And we also go out into the environment as well. So forests have their own acoustic context. So we've been out to forests in Finland and measured them in the snow and in the summer to get the sense of what it is that's different about the same environment at different times of the year. And of course, snow has a particular sound that I'm sure we're all familiar with when there's a fresh fall on the ground. But if we can't go and measure, how can we reconstruct a particular building? Well, we can model it. So I gave you an example from the Temple of Decision and the resounding Falkland project. Here's another building from, yes, York. This is a place called St. Mary's Abbey. St. Mary's Abbey is a ruin in a park in the centre of town. It's a ruin that people of York and the many, many tourists to York will interact with on a daily basis. They'll have their picnics there, their children will play there, they'll get drunk behind the ruins, they'll walk through the park, they might find out something about the history of the place. But we can reconstruct that building, and once we've reconstructed it, we can interrogate how sound behaves in that building, and we can get that acoustic fingerprint for a building that doesn't exist anymore. And you can see here how the model is built. It's like firing billiard balls out into the space, and you watch how they bounce around and arrive at the listening position. And you can see in the bottom there the reconstruction that we did with colleagues in our archaeology department, how the sound field, the acoustic fingerprint, builds up across the space. So that's what it looks like visually, but I'm a sound person, so let's have an example. So what you're going to hear first of all is the acoustic fingerprint of York Minster. It sounds a little bit like a decaying gunshot, so just so you're warned by that. And once you've heard that, you're going to hear a 4-part vocal quartet that we recorded in our Anechoic Chamber. Sounds a little bit unnatural. It's a bit unfair of me to play that to them. They don't like it when I do because they don't like the performance in there. But what we will then do, or what you'll then hear, is that 4-part vocal quartet combined with the acoustic fingerprint of York Minster. And the vocalists were never in the space. We can do that afterwards. And then about halfway through, the visual will change, and you will see or hear, most importantly, the vocal quartet be transformed into the reconstruction of St. Mary's Abbey. They sound quite similar, St. Mary's and York Minster, but they all sound slightly different. So here we go. Here's, first of all, the acoustic fingerprint of York Minster. It sounds like this. So from the point of view of acoustic engineers, it has a reverberation time of 8 seconds at 1 kilohertz. So at that particular range of frequency, it takes 8 seconds for the sound to die away completely. Here's our vocal quartet, Anechoic Chamber first of all, then York Minster, then St. Mary's. So fundamentally, that's what we do. We go out and we, as one of my colleagues says, we do acoustic stamp collecting of interesting buildings, or we rebuild interesting buildings and do the virtual stamp. But we're interested in how that can be used creatively. And for hundreds of years, composers have worked with particular spaces to inform the music that gets played within them. And that's being done in a modern sense as well by one of my colleagues at York called Dr. Ambrose Field in the music department. And Ambrose has used some of the data that we've generated to inform and write bespoke compositions for particular buildings. So this was one example. It's another building in York. It's called the Guildhall. And we went and did our measurement process. Ambrose took the data. He did some analysis of how long it took the sound to decay. He did an analysis of how sound changed the timbre of the voices that he was going to work with. And he wrote a bespoke piece of choral music just for that building. And he developed that technique further. So about a year ago, we did a performance in the ruins of St. Mary's Abbey, where we took all the singers, we mic'd them up, and we ran them through the data live, so that they sang in the ruins through the acoustic reconstruction of what St. Mary sounded like. And then we amplified it and put it over a PA to an audience of about 500 or 600 people. It was quite a remarkable experience. And it starts to think about how we can take a data analysis process and transform it into a live performance process, which brings us a little bit, and it's also, this material also gets fundamentally, is a fundamental design tool in music composition, computer music, and computer games as well. But we're interested in how it can be used in live performance, which brings us back to where I started at the beginning of this, which is York Theatre Royal. So this historic space in our city has changed forever. So these pictures that you see were taken about 12 to 15 months ago, before the theatre shut, and its 100-year-old auditorium space was transformed forever to inform it for hopefully the next 100 years. And we realised that as this place was going to change forever, we had to go and get that information about that space as it currently was before it was lost ultimately. So we spent a long period of time over a number of nights taking various different performer and audience locations around the auditorium and took the acoustic fingerprints. And we used various different types of microphones. So let's see if we've got some kind of laser here. Yeah, so that's a dummy head microphone. It's designed to simulate how our ears and heads affect sound. We use 360-degree surround sound microphones, and you can not quite see here, but there's various loudspeakers on the stage, each corresponding to where a performer might be during a performance, and then we measured at various seats across the house at the same time. We had to get as much information as we could before the theatre was going to change forever. And we were also interested not just the audience perspective, we were interested in the performer perspective as well. So we thought about how performers interact with that space. We're interested in how performers connect with their audience, and can we measure that, and can we see if there's been a change as the theatre has changed. And so we mic'd up these performers on stage and recorded them at various seats in the house, and we also used these virtual performers that are able to sing out from the stage into the auditorium. And so we have a repeatable performer that will always do exactly what we want them to do without any complaint. So it's about getting this information, and we got video information as well, but it was predominantly about sound because that's the domain in which we work really. And then we started to think, well, what can we do with this now? How can we develop some new experiences using this data that we've gathered? And of course, around the same time, as we've already heard, virtual reality was starting to become a really, really big thing. What can we do with virtual reality? Lots of people are interested in this domain, and there are lots of big players in the field. Sony are about to bring out their PlayStation VR headset. We've got the Oculus Rift that's been bought out by Facebook. We've got ones that are designed for mobile phones, and of course Google Cardboard, which is very, very simple, enabling people to get access to this aspect of the technology in a very easy way. But most important for us is not the visuals, it's actually the sound that goes with it. So the sound that goes with it is one of the reasons why this time round virtual reality is maybe working, is because it enhances the sense of immersion, it makes us believe what we're seeing and experiencing in a better way. And this is technology that's been around in our field of sound for a long, long time, but now there's a means to deliver it effectively to a much wider audience. And so that's why we think it's an exciting time for us to be doing creative sound work in relation to virtual reality. So what we did with that data, we took audience perspective information, we took 360-degree camera information to go with our 360-degree microphone information, and we combined it in a game engine to give a VR experience of what the theatre was like, because of course it doesn't exist like that anymore. It has now fundamentally changed forever. So we have a VR experience of what that theatre is like. And the key thing that's important from the audio perspective is not when yes, you can do the usual thing or the VR experience of kind of going, wow, this looks amazing. But it's the audio that's really important as well. So from the point of view, if you were sitting here at this point in the theatre watching those performers on stage, as you're going wow and looking around the building, the audio from those performers is always heard from the stage area. Okay? So that's an important distinction compared to normal stereo listening over headphones. When you move your head around listening to headphones, the whole music moves with you, which is a very unnatural thing in terms of our human experience of our sound world, but it's something we're quite used to when we're listening to music and sound. With VR, it's different. With VR, it's about how our ears and brain work and interpret sound, and so the images and the sound that we get work together, which makes it much more believable. So how can we use this in theatre practice? So we're working with a company called IOU, which are based in Halifax, and IOU are working on a project over the next 18 months called Rear View, which takes an old, there we go, the clicker again, which takes an old London double-decker bus, strips out of the back of it, and puts an raked audience seating for 50 people. And they are devising material where you will take a bus tour around your city and you will see and hear a piece of performance work played out behind you. So the audience will start in a building, and then as part of that process they're taken into the bus, and then they're driven behind, and then a car will follow, and you can see something else going on with one of the characters here as well. As part of that process, IOU want us to give them augmented audio. So as you're driving around the town, we're going to cue in the audience to things that are happening around them as they go. So you might hear a clock tower tolling, with the bell going in a clock tower when there is no bell at the time that the performance is going on, and we want the entire audience to be going like that. And that's easily done using VR headsets, but it's not easily done in a cheap and effective way for an audience of 50 people at the same time. So there's some technological challenges there, but it's been driven by the writing process of what is desired in terms of telling the story for this particular audience. And it's also about experience. So I talked about the St. Mary's reconstruction, and that was a one-off experience in terms of how it was pulled together for one night only. And it would have been great if we could do some VR capture of that experience to capture it forever so that people could go and experience it again. And you've got big players in this field like Google who are doing this and are putting VR capture kits, audio and video, in performance spaces around the world so that you can capture these experiences. But I suppose my difficulty with that is it becomes an isolating experience. We talked about how VR can deliver empathy and understanding, but it's something that you experience on your own, whereas one of the great things about theatre, it's a shared experience. You go with your friends, you go with your families, you can talk about it, you can feel your reactions to it at the same time. How can we do that with VR? It's a difficult thing. I'm sure it will be solved eventually, but right now it's difficult. So just as a passive understanding of a particular event, it's useful, but not from the point of view of live performance. So we've turned to our colleagues in the BBC. So the BBC are interested in the future of technology and the future of storytelling, just as we all are ultimately, because they're thinking about their audiences and they're thinking about younger people and how they can engage with them effectively. And so they started to have a number of projects in their R&D group which are related to this, and one of them is called Venue Explorer, which is what you see here. Nothing to do with live performance as such, but this was the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. What they wanted to experience here or think about here is, well, rather than having a curated or a directed or produced stream of information that you'd watch on your television, could we give someone the experience of being in the auditorium or the venue and selecting what they want to watch? And so you can see here that they've augmented the visuals with information about what's going on across the track and field at various times and what's coming up later on so that you can be informed about what you might want to watch. And they shoot it with really, really high resolution cameras so that you can click on one of these events and zoom into that event without having to do any reshooting or re-editing, and you can see what's going on close up without any loss of quality, without much loss of quality. So how could we explore a live event? So now we're thinking with York Theatre Royal and the BBC how we can take this idea and apply it to theatre. And so our interest is how we can develop companion content that goes alongside what you're watching on the stage. And of course, what you're seeing on the stage is the story, but what you're not seeing as an audience member is the whole process that's led to that point. You're not seeing the backstory of the characters, you're not seeing the development of the writing process, you're not seeing how everything is interlinked and what's happening next. Why is that character standing at one particular position on the stage? Why are they holding that particular prop? There's a way of giving this information to the audience in new ways, and so you might have character development. Why is that person lying in that bed? What am I thinking as I'm saying these words? Are the words and my thoughts interrelated or are they not? We could change the view. This is the Crucible, which is from in the old York Theatre Royal. It was shot in the round, so if you prefer, actually I want to go and see what the action looks like from over here, then you could change the view as an audience member. You could zoom into this particular character to get a real close-up of their facial expressions and again get a much closer experience as to what is actually going on with the story. We could deliver additional content, the stage directions, so people can understand the process of how this thing is working. We can do commentary, so actor commentary as to how they're, like DVD commentary that you get, but intimately related to the performance. And then we can do things such as audio description and audio accessibility issues as well, so we're increasing the accessibility of the performance for many other people. This is just a conversation that we've started to think about, but it's a very, very exciting possibility as to how we can bring this technology, these trends, these directions into something that hopefully is going to be new. So VR offers lots of possibilities for engagement, theatre and live performance, but a limited shared experience is what I'm arguing. Audio for virtual reality, the technology that the audio people have developed alongside it, is quite exciting in terms of what we can do to add rich additional content to existing experiences. And understanding the acoustic environment, which is what I'm all about ultimately, and the sound objects within that environment is the key to controlling that content, so that we can start to develop it in new ways. And we can take, again, hints and tips from other existing media such as film, broadcast, and how their production workflows work together to develop something that can be efficiently delivered in the theatre, because ultimately what we're about is giving new stories in new ways to new audiences. Thank you very much.